When Keir Starmer was fighting for the votes of Labour members, he said he wanted to unite the party and put an end to factionalism. Now, within 3 months of gaining power, he sacked his closest competitor in that leadership race and the party's most high-profile left-winger in the shadow cabinet. This was over retweeting an article in a mainstream newspaper about one of Britain's leading actors. Keir Starmer has control of the Labour Party, the ears of the corporate press, and he's declared war on the left. What the hell do we do now? To discuss Keir Starmer sacking Rebecca Long-Bailey, I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. How are you doing, Aaron?
Nice day. I think I might have. I've had a nice day. I think I've had maybe a bit of sunstroke. I was walking around the New Forest with my dog and my partner, and then we were just walking. I was like, I'm not taking my phone. Time to chill out. Beautiful day, hottest day of the year. And then my partner, she was like, sort of the dying embers of her battery. She was like, Rebecca Long-Bailey's just been fired. And I was like, for what? And then I'd read the article actually before we'd left the car, and I was like, are you kidding? Is this a joke? I was shocked. I mean, I'm still kind of I can't really make head or tail of it, but I guess that's the point of tonight's show. You know, me and you and I, in partnership with our audience, are going to try and work out what the hell is going on.
Yeah. Let's start with first things first. So we'll go through the day's events. What kicked all of this off? So the offending moment was this tweet from Rebecca Long-Bailey at around 10 a.m. today. She tweeted, "Maxine Peake is an absolute diamond," and shared an article in The Independent. Most of our audience will know who Maxine Peake is. She's a successful, famous actor in the UK, appears in lots of sort of progressive movies. She was in Peterloo. She was also in Shameless. Now, that article, she was, I suppose, one of the most high-profile Corbyn supporters over the last 5 years. Now, that article, it was Maxine Peake talking about the 2019 general election. The headline from it, the takeaway from it, was people who couldn't vote Labour because of Corbyn, they voted Tory as far as I'm concerned. Sort of like a hardline Corbynite position. I mean, there was lots in the article that isn't really Keir Starmer's politics. She's talking about, you know, overthrowing capitalism, etc., etc. But you know, it was a left-wing and polemical interview, really. But what caused controversy was that it contained this section. So let's bring this up. This is the root of the controversy. Systemic racism is a global issue, Maxine Peake adds. The tactics used by the police in America, kneeling on George Floyd's neck, that was learnt from seminars with Israeli secret services. So the tactic used by the police in America, kneeling on George Floyd's neck, that was learnt from seminars with Israeli secret services. The spokesperson for the Israeli police has denied this. A 2016 Amnesty International report said that hundreds of law enforcement officials had traveled to Israel for training. So you've got there a statement from Maxine Peake that method by which George Floyd was killed was learnt from the Israeli secret services. The person who was doing the interview think that sounds a bit far-fetched. They've done some research. They say, well, they've denied it, but it's also in an Amnesty International report. That gets labeled an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Now, a bit later in the show, we're going to talk about whether or not this is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, whether it's true, whether or not it's true. Is it anti-Semitic? First of all, I just want to take you through the events as the day unfolded. So once this happens, once it comes to light, this sort of section of the article gets shared. There's obviously a big row. The claim is that Rebecca Long-Bailey has endorsed anti-Semitism by sharing this. Just after midday, what I thought was going to be really the end of the controversy, 2 hours after the original tweet, Long-Bailey tweets this clarification. So she writes, "I retweeted Maxine Peake's article because of her significant achievements and because the thrust of her argument is to stay in the Labour Party. It wasn't intended to be an endorsement of all aspects of the article." So she's saying, look, I shared an article. The broader point was this. I agreed with the broader point. I didn't agree with everything that was in it. As I say, I thought that was going to be the end of the matter. But 3 hours later, she's sacked. She's sacked from her position as Shadow Secretary of State for Education. So this was the statement from a spokesperson for Keir Starmer. Let's get this up. This afternoon, Keir Starmer asked Rebecca Long-Bailey to step down from the shadow cabinet. The article Rebecca shared earlier today contained an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. As leader of the Labour Party, Keir has been clear that restoring trust with the Jewish community is a #1 priority. Anti-Semitism takes many different forms, and it is important we are all vigilant against it. We're going to go into detail over all of these claims as this show goes on. But first of all, I want your immediate, instant take, Aaron.
Maxine Peake should sue Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. She's been called an anti-Semite. She's been called a conspiracy theorist. We can pull that sentence back up. It's not a conspiracy theory. Multiple police forces in the United States have been taught by Israeli secret services to the extent where certain parts of the United States no longer will allow their forces to be trained by Israeli police officers or various state agencies within Israel. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact. And I think this was one thing when it was being, thrown at Jeremy Corbyn or left-wing members of the Labour Party by Margaret Hodge or by Wes Streeting. That's one thing. But this is a serious lady. She's an actress. She's a public figure. She has a reputation. And she's frankly been slandered by the leader of the Labour Party. There's no two ways about it. In an article where she's instructing people to please stay in the Labour Party. What is going through this man's mind? And so in the context of actually Labour's polling's doing really well. I've had lots of criticisms of Starmer over the last couple of months, but Labour's polling's doing well. So I've tried to sort of be fair. And I said, well, in their defence, they're polling well. Of course, they should be polling well. The Tories are responsible for 60,000 people dying in this country. The economy is about to collapse in the second half of this year. Millions of 1 in 6 people with mortgages are having to renegotiate their mortgages, get mortgage holidays. Millions of people presently furloughed expect to be made unemployed. And his priority, rather than saying that Robert Jenrick should be fired, rather than explicitly saying Dominic Cummings should be fired, he sacks a socialist member of his own shadow cabinet for sharing an article by somebody who's interviewing somebody else, saying something which isn't even untrue. Very odd. What it tells me is that Keir Starmer's priority isn't party unity, isn't defeating the Tories, isn't actually really paying attention to the issues that really matter to people in this country: coronavirus, jobs, high streets, housing, whether that's rent or mortgages. What's the priority? It's clearing out the left. And so what that tells me is the mindset which informs the 2017 leaked report, that scurrilous, outrageous report, that same mentality still has a grip on the very highest reaches of the Labour Party. And frankly, that's deeply disturbing for no other reason than it means that Labour will not win the next general election. They have absolutely no chance in hell if 3 months into his leadership, this is Keir Starmer's first statement of intent.
We're going to go, obviously, all of those issues we'll come back on. I want us to focus for a moment because it is, it's the core of the controversy, whether what Maxine Peake said was an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So let's start by getting up that particular statement, and then we'll look through the details. Was it true or not? So can we get this back up? Systemic racism is a global issue. The tactics used by the police in America, kneeling on George Floyd's neck, that was learnt from seminars with the Israeli secret services. Now, let's keep that up. We're going to go in a moment into whether or not precisely what she said is true. Why would this be anti-Semitic? And the argument that it's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory is that it's saying that things that happen in the United States, things that happen anywhere, they're all caused by, their ultimate root is Israel. And I think that's kind of a misunderstanding of left-wing thought here. And this has been, I think, what people have been, well, either mistakenly or intentionally sort of confusing, is this idea that when people talk about the connections between different imperial states, what they're doing is they're saying that one causes the other. And no, the tradition of Palestinian solidarity, what you tend to be talking about is that these are all linked. So it's not that the American police are racist because they did training in Israel. It's that the racist policing that happens in Israel, the racist policing that happens in the United States, and yeah, you could also say the racist policing that happens in the UK, but I think there is a relevancy to that connection because they're both highly militarized police forces. So to me, on the surface of it, that doesn't seem particularly anti-Semitic to me. Is it completely true? And here, I don't think it is completely true, but it's not that far from it. So let's look at the Amnesty article, which was cited by the independent journalist in that report. And it's worth noting, it wasn't a report. So she said it was in this Amnesty International report. It was actually just a blog post, but it was from Amnesty USA. Can we get this up now? This is about the relationship between American cops and Israeli cops. They say, when the US Department of Justice published a report August the 10th that documented widespread constitutional violations, discriminatory enforcement, and culture of retaliation within the Baltimore Police Department, there was rightly a general reaction of outrage. But what hasn't received as much attention is where Baltimore police received training on crowd control, use of force, and surveillance. Israel's national police, military, and intelligence services. Let's go to the next one. Baltimore law enforcement officials, along with hundreds of others from Florida, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, Arizona, a bunch of states here, as well as the DC Capitol Police, have all traveled to Israel for training. Thousands of others have received training from Israeli officials here in the US. Many of these trips are taxpayer funded, while others are privately funded. Since 2002, the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee's Project Interchange, and the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs have paid for police chiefs, assistant chiefs, and captains to train in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. So what's in this document is, a statement that often American police forces do go to Israel to get training. And I often see, when debates like this come up, people call Amnesty International an anti-Semitic organization. It's obsessed with Israel. It's all they care about is attacking the only Jewish state. Now, I clicked on the links that were in this original blog post, and let's get up one of them, which is from the Jerusalem Post. So this isn't an anti-Israel newspaper. It's the most popular English language Israeli newspaper. So let's get up some quotes from this. So this is from 2016. Citing Israel's preeminence in counterterrorism operations, US police chiefs are visiting the country as part of an ADL delegation to learn advanced training techniques from Israel police. Among the delegation are chiefs of the Orlando, Florida, and San Bernardino, blah, 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 who recently witnessed unprecedented terrorist attacks in their cities. Oren Segal, director of the ADL's Center on Extremism, said approximately a dozen senior law enforcement officers from across the US are participating in the National Counterterrorism Seminar, an annual one-week event which the organization hosts. We bring top-level law enforcement from the States to Israel to learn about civil society here, the role the enforcement play in terms of protecting communities with regard to terrorism, and to provide a better sense to American law enforcement about Israel, Segal said on Tuesday. And I think what's interesting here is that the Jerusalem Post is citing Israel's preeminence in counterterrorism operations. So when people talk about why do people always talk about the connections between American police and Israeli police and not American police and British police, for example? And that is because the role of Israel as a settler colonial state, that's not necessarily all it is, but one thing it is a settler colonial state. What that means is you have lots of counterinsurgency policing.
Yeah.
And so they are a world leader when it comes to counterinsurgency policing. So obviously when people talk about why America seeks advice from the Israeli police, that's why. Where what Maxine Peake said slightly demurs from what we have evidence for is this idea about the kneel. She suggested that the police action of kneeling on someone's neck was learnt from a seminar in Israel, and it doesn't seem to me there's any evidence for that. And that is a bit lazy. I think it's unfortunate to say something that's not quite true in this area, which is to sort of blame what is just an ordinary American police tactic originates purely within American policing to say that is related to Israel. Aaron, so it's slightly more, let's bring you back in. It's slightly more complex than saying it's completely true. It's not completely true, but it's not way off either.
It's something an actress said in an interview. Yeah, it's slightly wrong. The article in question is then shared by a Labour MP who's then fired. And you listen to broadcast news all of today and TV, radio. Rebecca Long-Bailey has been fired from the shadow cabinet today for sharing an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Wow. Like, there's no nuance there because absolutely the mainstream media don't, give the benefit of the doubt or provide context to these stories. She shared something from The Independent. It's regulated by Ipso. If you don't like what they write, go make a complaint. An interview with somebody else. The primary line of argument in the piece had nothing to do with this. She makes an offhand comment, which is, pretty well informed. Like you say, the Israeli state is really exceptional in modern policing techniques because it's a settler colonial state. And am I being anti-Semitic if I say that? No, Britain was a settler colonial state. America is a settler colonial state. If you look at, for instance, great line from Priya Gopal when I interviewed her earlier this week. She said the history of modern policing and the history of fighting insurgencies are kind of mutually constitutive. The first police force in the British Isles isn't the London Metropolitan Police Service, as Alex Vitale told me in our great interview a few weeks ago. It's the Royal Irish Constabulary, which is effectively it's an apparatus to repress a colonized kind of set of colonized potential uprisings. That's what it's about. And then that particular apparatus comes back home, and it is the basis of Robert Peel's London Metropolitan Police Service. And so, yes, of course, if you're constantly fighting insurgencies, as Britain was in Kenya and Malaya in the 1950s, so when the Americans go to Vietnam, they say, you know who we want to learn from? We want to learn from the Brits. They've been using Agent Orange against the Malayans. They've been using these detention camps, the Briggs Plan. And by the way, both tactics were both adopted by the United States in fighting the Vietnam War, because the Brits were really good at it, because we were a colonial power. That's kind of happened in microcosm in regards to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And thus, the Israeli sort of policing apparatus is very effective at dealing with these issues. They've got lots of experience, just like the British did in Ireland, Malaya, Kenya, over decades. They don't have that kind of know-how these days. So it's absolutely, like you say, it's an absolutely legitimate analog to bring up. And equally, the Israeli state and the American state are both, incredibly highly policed states. Yeah, you can't say that about the level of policing in Britain. There's racist police violence in this country, of course there is. But the intensity of policing, the experience of policing in this country is nothing like what it is in the United States or as it is with Israel. So it's a perfectly valid comparison to make. And equally, if she said structural racism, systemic racism is a global issue, George Floyd was killed in the United States, but actually the tactics came from British colonial policing in this country. If she'd said that, many of the exact same people would have said, why is it always about blaming Britain? This is a problem for America. It's got nothing to do with us. She's trying to provide a broader historic geographical context. And within that context, it's entirely legitimate to raise how Israel polices racialized minorities. There's a really important equivalence to be drawn there.
I think Tom Mills had a really good tweet today, a really good take on this. It's basically just summarizing what you said. We can probably get this up now, which is imperial states have often learned techniques of violence from colonies, satellites, and outrider states, Israel included. And this is how people, as you say, how Alex Vitali talks about policing. It's this fact that, countries, how they behave, the strategies they use for governance and for policing, they learn from each other. And often, outposts of imperialism have a particular relationship to those core countries. And yes, it's disputed whether or not, people say, oh, Israel isn't a settler colonial state, but and you can have that argument. I mean, I think it clearly is. And it's clearly not anti-Semitic to say that. And historically, states have learned counterinsurgency, policing tactics from those extreme cases where you've got an occupying force trying to suppress a native population.
Can I just come in here, Michael?
Yeah.
Somebody might say, oh, if you call it a settler colonial state, somebody would say that's anti-Semitic. Theodore Herzl, in letters, is saying we want a settler colonial state. He explicitly says this. Right, so one of the godfathers of early early 20th century Zionism, the idea that there has to be the right to self-determination necessitates a homeland, the land of Israel, etc. Look, I believe the Jewish people have a right to self-determination. Ash did a great tweet about covering all of this stuff, but he quite explicitly says, if you're looking at the kind of intellectual genealogy of where the intellectual basis of the modern Israeli state comes from. And as we've already said, there are many settler colonial states. This is not we already talked about this one country. Well, we can talk about the Americas. Europeans killed 100 million people there.
What's relevant, though, is that I feel like why Israel comes up, so much in this respect is because it's still doing settler colonialism.
Precisely. It's 19th century style colonialism.
Because everyone else got to do it. But, the USA got to do it. They got to finish the job. And now everyone accepts their statehood. Which is true. But if we were around at the time, I hope we would have opposed the settler colonialism of the Europeans going into the United States as well and kicking the Native Americans off their land.
Would you have been like Kevin Costner in Dances with Wolves?
I actually haven't seen that movie. So
very moving film. Michael Walker sort of goes to live with the indigenous peoples and then realize the white man, the gringo can't be allowed to win. But it's true. And I just want to say very quick, I didn't finish this point. Theodore Herzl, we've got a great guest coming on Novara Media next week. Rashid Khalidi, I think, or Khalid Rashidi. He wrote fantastic. I'm a bit frazzled today. I woke up this morning with my dog again at 7:30. great book about basically, you know, the long war against the Palestinian people over 100 years. And he talks about these writings with Theodore Herzl in the early 20th century. He's quite explicitly writing to European statespeople, political figures and so on, saying, we want to be a European outpost in the Middle East. It's in your interest. We want to be a settler colonial state, you know, policing Asia. We can do that. Help us help you. I mean, which is fine. You know, you're fighting for your people, you're fighting for your nation, you're going to try every tactic. That's legitimate. But the idea that, oh, well, he's saying it's like a settler colonial state, how dare you? That's anti-Semitic. The people who literally advanced the idea 100 years ago were saying that.
We're going to go to a couple of super chats on the. So we've got the RPMD. Don't know what that stands for. With a £20 super chat. Thank you very much. A new party won't work. Bide your time and wait for the chance. We'll get onto that topic of how the left should respond in a moment. I do agree with you, but I suppose we'll go into more detail on why. And Dexy Zoo tweets on the hashtag Tisky Sour. Do we still feel part of Labour? The heart of what was good about Labour over the recent past has stopped beating. As I say, we'll get back to that question slightly later on in the show. It's a good one. Let's get up, actually, very quickly, John Landsman's statement here, because John Landsman he's someone who often got critiqued from people who said that he bought into the narrative that Labour was anti-Semitic. He's definitely someone who takes this very, very seriously. So he tweeted this afternoon. Can we get this up? I retweeted this. So he's quote tweeting Rebecca Long-Bailey. I retweeted this 5 hours ago without comment in a break in a Labour Party anti-Semitism panel, my 4th in the last month. In my view, there is nothing in what Maxine Peake said that a Labour panel would view as anti-Semitic. And he goes on, Rebecca is every bit as committed to ending anti-Semitism in the Labour Party as I am. Her sacking is a reckless overreaction from someone who promised to end factionalism in the party and political interference in disciplinary matters. Keir has now made these tasks harder. So, which I think is quite an important point, the idea that if what you want is for people to see racism in the Labour Party as something that we should deal with in a non-factional manner, then really overreacting and sacking your factional opponent for retweeting an article in a mainstream British newspaper is not a it's not a good tactic to take. Let's look at Rebecca Long-Bailey's statement post her sacking. So she did a fairly long tweet thread immediately after. Can we get this up? Today, I retweeted an interview that my constituent and stalwart Labour Party supporter Maxine Peake gave to The Independent. Its main thrust was anger with the Conservative government's handling of the current emergency and a call for Labour Party unity. These sentiments are shared by everyone in our movement and millions of people in our country. I learned that many people were concerned by references to international sharing of training and restraint techniques between police and security forces. In no way was my retweet an intention to endorse every part of that article. I wish to acknowledge these concerns and duly issued a clarification of my retweet with the wording agreed in advance by the Labour Party leader's office. But after posting, I was subsequently instructed to take both this agreed clarification and my original retweet down. I could not do this in good conscience without issuing of a press statement of clarification. I had asked to discuss these matters with Keir before agreeing what further action to take, but sadly, he had already made his decision. I am proud of the policies we have developed, etc., etc. And she ends by saying she shall continue to support the Labour Party in Parliament under Keir Starmer's leadership. So a sort of conciliatory tone taken at the end there. I think what's interesting there is that, she was asked...
Can you bring up the last tweet? Because it's also, she's kind of saying, I'm not going to leave the Labour Party. It was kind of weird.
Yeah, no one was really expecting her to
tweet 7. No, but it's like, no, but isn't she might lose the whip or something? I don't know who knows what private conversations they've been having. Look, I'm clear that I shall continue to support the Labour Party in Parliament. I mean, what the hell? To represent the people of Salford and Eccles, as if like it's being talked about that she's going to lose the whip, or I don't know. That's what I read from that.
Yeah, I thought it was just a sort of banal conciliatory, not banal, and sort of like I didn't think it was particularly notable, but you might be right. I mean,
support the Labour Party in Parliament under Keir Starmer. I mean, that sounds to me like people are talking about the whip. But anyway,
yeah, because she's saying even if you take away the whip, I'll continue to. Yeah, that is a bit strange. I thought the bit that was weird was that she'd agreed with Keir Starmer to retweet that clarification. So obviously, it seems like they'd come to an agreed course of action, which was that she would retweet her original tweet and say, offer this clarification. Then it sounds to me as if the leader's office sort of changed their mind. They're like, oh, actually, this is not good enough. So they completely changed what their demand is of her. If they wanted her to delete and apologize, they should have said that straight away, not agreed with her the wording of a clarification. So it seems like they agreed the wording of a clarification. She did that. Then they fired her anyway.
Honestly, people are like, oh, Keir Starmer, ruthless. I mean, maybe. Or it could just be kind of thick of it, Ed Miliband Mark II, trying to please everybody, just doesn't really know what the hell's going on, doesn't really have a political grasp on the fundamentals. I think that's my bet is that's Keir Starmer. I want the guy to be the next prime minister. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it's such a. I mean, even if you don't agree with us or whatever, who saw this coming, right? I mean, obviously she was being isolated, frozen out, etc. in the shadow, but like this quickly today, when you've got the Tory party on the ropes with Robert Jenrick. So on the one hand, you could say, well, they've taken their chance to get rid of a sort of political opponent. People have had misgivings, whether you agree or disagree, and in regards to Labour's relationship with the Jewish community, it's been terrible. It can repair that within 3 or 4 months of him gaining the leadership. That's all true. I just don't think that's why this has happened. I think this is kind of like a thick of it style. Oh, yes, we're going to fire this person. A bit like when Ed Miliband said we're going to have an investigation into Unite and Falkirk. We're like, this is crazy. What are you doing? There was no grounds for it. I think there's kind of a bit of a panic here. I mean, why the hell would you do that? Keir Starmer has won the party leadership on the basis of being a unifier. And people can go, this, and that was his whole pitch. And he's gone, I'm not a unifier. Go fuck yourselves. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense at all. And he didn't even do it in a particularly, even when he was talking about it on the BBC afterwards, he didn't make it in a particularly, didn't express any kind of positive sentiment towards Rebecca Long-Bailey. Absolutely not at all. And you think, for Rebecca Long-Bailey, I feel so sorry for her, because now, okay, in our political bubble, people will be like, well, it's complicated, or I agree with her, or whatever. Most people, Rebecca Long-Bailey, oh, yeah, that's the lady who, the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory lady, right? That's a cross she's going to have to bear for years for sharing an article in The Independent, an interview from Maxine Peake. That's why I said at the top of the show, Maxine Peake should consider suing Keir Starmer. It's a really serious thing to besmirch somebody's name like this. That's something that the Rebecca Long-Bailey is going to have to carry for 10, 20 years. It's not acceptable.
I mean, it probably is worth. Maxine Peake has taken a slightly different tone to what you're suggesting.
I know she has. I don't think she should.
Yeah, well, you never know what the origin of these tweets is, but let's get it up for the sake of covering everything. So Maxine Peake says, I feel it's important for me to clarify that when talking to The Independent, I was inaccurate in my assumptions of American police training and its sources. I find racism and anti-Semitism abhorrent, and I in no way wished nor intended to add fodder to any views of the contrary. I think that's a reasonable statement, actually. I mean, as I say, the specific claim that she made,
it's not reasonable. It's not reasonable because we're dealing with people who are bad faith actors. It's not reasonable. You're an idiot. It's not reasonable. If you're dealing with good faith actors, that's an absolutely correct thing to say. She's not.
Well, there was a specific claim that she made in a national newspaper that wasn't true. I mean, if you do that, you might want to correct yourself. I mean, maybe she could have been a bit more bolshy and said that some of this campaign is clearly. I mean, it might be in greed of her agent as well. Who knows?
Of course, it's her agent. It's not. But Michael, what's being said in the media? This is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. What is it written in that interview? It's not an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Yes, it's a minor error of detail and something. It's not an anti-Semitic conspiracy. It's categorically not. Well, this is why we are where we are. This is why 2 years ago, look, we get mandatory selection. We had a left Labour leader. We had a left general secretary. Labour polling 40% plus, because the left doesn't have what it takes to win, because it's not interested in saying, you know what, I'm not gonna play this game with bad faith actors. We've been doing that for years, and look where it's got us. And still, you look at the tweets. I was really happy, by the way, with Rebecca Long-Bailey tweeting that thread. Still, you look at this from Maxine Peake. People still haven't learned this lesson. You can't behave like this with bad faith actors. There were people in the Labour Party who weren't suspended for a year who were Holocaust deniers under Ian McNichol's general secretaryship, right? For a year, they weren't suspended. And the very same people who did nothing are now saying, of course, Rebecca Long-Bailey, she should be expelled. The exact same faction within the political Labour Party, within the parliamentary Labour Party. Come on. This is ridiculous. When does it end? I'm not just saying this to be sort of hyperbolic. This is to describe what happened as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory is completely and utterly incorrect.
And I mean, I agree with the bad sort of faith actors in the sense that whenever this happens to the Conservative Party or to someone on the Labour right, what they'll say is, I'm not even having this conversation. This is a ridiculous conversation, which is what Corbyn should have done when they had power in the Labour Party. It's slightly harder when you're in a minority in the party after that. But I mean, I feel like
we heard it all the time with IHRA. Oh, we'll get. I remember Matt Saab. I love Matt Saab. We'll get IHRA, and then it'll all be over.
I was against IHRA.
No, I know you were great.
I was against IHRA because it was. I mean, it was
free
saying
speech.
it was saying it was racist to say things that were true.
Yeah.
In this case, Maxine Peake did say something that was technically not true. But yeah, that doesn't
No,
necessarily make it an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
IHRA, I'm not saying IHRA relates to this. What I'm saying is, in terms of the IHRA, at that particular point, it created a political impasse for the Labour left, and they were like, well, if we do this, then it'll all be hunky dory. No, it won't, because if you were dealing with good faith actors, yeah, sure, you aren't.
We're going to look at whether there was another motive. So we both agree that Keir Starmer has overreacted, but was that potentially because he wanted to get rid of Rebecca Long-Bailey anyway? There was an interesting tweet which was posted by Harry York, who's political correspondent at The Telegraph, and then deleted, which was interesting. Can we get this up? So he writes, the truth is that for weeks there has been a lot of concern on Labour's front bench about Long-Bailey on other issues. I'm told her stance on schools and closeness to teaching unions was seen as giving Tories ammunition in an area that should be one of Labour's strengths. So it seems, this rings true to me. We've all seen that Rebecca Long-Bailey was sort of taken off the airwaves to talk about schools. They always put forward other people. And that, it seems very plausible, is because they thought she was too close to the teaching union. She was sort of giving their line instead of the Keir Starmer line, which was that we want people to go back to schools, right? So, and they thought that was a political weakness. Now, there's two conversations one can have here. One of them is who was right in terms of what was the correct approach to take regarding schools. Was it the Keir Starmer one to say sort of like, we're not going to commit either way because then the government will use it against us, and we want to say we kind of want to get them back to school but in a non-committal way? Or to do the Rebecca Long-Bailey one, which is say we back the National Education Union and we don't think schools are safe to go back to yet, which was basically what she implied. That's one question. The other question, though, and I think this is more clear cut, is that if you have a political disagreement with someone and then you use a kind of trumped up claim of anti-Semitism to get rid of them when the real reason you want to get rid of them is because they've taken a different political position to you, that's grotesque. And it seems to me that this will give fuel to the fire of people who, of the fact that racism in the Labour Party so often is dealt with through the lens of, I'll say they're racist because I want to get rid of them anyway.
Yeah.
I'll tolerate their racism because I don't want to get rid of them. And that's kind of that's the message this is sending out.
Well, look, again, it's like, I think this is a real weak point for Keir Starmer. I think race is a real weak point. I think, we talked about what were the advantages. One of the people, Tom Kibasi, who supported him, said he's an oven ready prime minister if the Tories screw up. And of course, I said late 2019, early 2020, well, they're not going to screw up. We've got 4 or 5 years of this. And actually, it turns out coronavirus made that quite a good argument for Keir Starmer. He looks like a prime minister. That's an argument for Keir Starmer. But the guy does have real Achilles heels. And I do think one is race. All of his team around him in the leader's office, I think it's universally white. I might be wrong. I think maybe one brown person. I don't know. To the best of my knowledge, there's no black person. You had a female general secretary replaced by an older white guy. You look at the shadow cabinet; it's got fewer black faces in it than under Jeremy Corbyn. Then you go further back, and this isn't on Keir Starmer. You've got the Bernie Grant program, which is about elevating black and brown voices in the Labour Party to empower them as members to run for public office. 50 people on that program, I believe. Do you know how many were PPCs in the last general election? 0. None of them. And so I think the Labour Party has huge problems here. And by the way, write this down. The Tories will have a brown or black leader before Labour does. And do you want to know why? Because the Labour Party, particularly the Labour Centre and Labour Right, are so obsessed with courting this mythical idea of centrist public opinion, they won't do the right thing. Well, we'd love a female leader, but John Bull in Cheltenham won't have it. Well, the Tories have had 2 female leaders. Arguably the most impressive politician in British politics, Nicola Sturgeon, is a woman with the SNP. The Lib Dems have had a female leader. The Greens have had a female leader. Hell, even UKIP have had a female leader, but the Labour Party can't do it. And I don't think that's an accident. And I think the same will apply to brown and black leadership within the Labour Party. We've seen it, by the way. We had a black lady who was a Shadow Home Secretary. She was destroyed, and not just by her political enemies, by people also within the same political party. We saw Patrick Hannigan in the leaked Labour report choreographing harassment towards her with the media whilst he was a senior member of Labour Party management. This party stinks on racism. And so I think you're absolutely right. We have to remember that every time we see racist or claims of racist or anti-Semitic issues being mobilized in this way for what I think are inarguably factional issues.
We're going to go to a couple more comments before our final topic, which is what the left should and can do next. Rob Hogg with a £10 super chat says, I think it's no coincidence that this comes the day after the formation of the Labour to win, in brackets, only if it's on our terms. Progress, Labour first cabal. And Connor Sweeney with a £10 super chat says, thanks for doing this tonight, guys. The left needs to go to war over this. If we keep backing down from fights, if we've done for the last 5 years, we deserve to be purged. Great link to what the left can do, because I mean, in a way, it's almost limited, isn't it? I mean, Aaron, the problem here really is that Keir Starmer doesn't seem like he wants to unite the party. It seems like what he's more keen to do is send out signals that he is having a clean break with Corbynism. He doesn't think he needs the votes of left-wingers, or actually, I think this is an interesting point which was made on Twitter today. He doesn't seem to think he really needs the votes of black people and Muslims, because left-wingers, black people and Muslims, they all live in safe seats. What he wants is especially, older white conservative swing voters, and that's the message he's giving out. And he has all the power within the Labour Party, basically. I mean, hopefully we can have a united left slate and they'll win positions on the NEC. But ultimately, he can choose to hire or fire people from the shadow cabinet. And most importantly, unlike Jeremy Corbyn, he has the power, sorry, not the power, connections, the support of so much of the mainstream press that he can do all of this in a really cost-free way. Have you seen any political editor today go on TV and say, Keir Starmer is a Stalinist person who wants to purge anyone from a slightly different political faction as himself? He wants Labour to be a purity project, not a party that brings people together, not the pluralist organisation it apparently was under previous leaders. Are you going to hear that? No, because Keir Starmer has these people on side, which means that he can kind of do this all in a bit of a cost-free way. Obviously, I don't want to encourage fatalism, though. So, Aaron, have you got more practical advice than me in terms of how the left can have leverage in this situation?
Well, firstly, I would disagree that, if Labour just gets this mythical swing voter and these swings, they weren't swing seats, by the way, 20 years ago, these were Labour safe seats, the Red Wall, South Wales. Labour is very close to losing a lot more seats than it just lost. And by the way, its national share of the vote could go down 1 or 2%, and it's losing dozens of seats. And people might think, well, no, Keir Starmer, come on. Last year, Labour got 32%. That was more than they got under Ed Miliband in 2015. It was more than they got under Gordon Brown in 2010, significantly more. So, well, if we see a slight resurgence of the Liberal Democrats, I don't think that's necessarily likely because people justifiably hate them. All manner of things could be on the table. So Labour, I think right now, if there was a general election, they'd probably stand still. They might gain 5 or 10 seats. But it's equally possible, I think, that they lose seats, especially if they're not fighting against Boris Johnson. This whole bet is that it's Keir Starmer versus Boris Johnson. And of course, let's say we come out of this, the other side of this 6 months' time. There's loads of pent-up demand. People are just so grateful that we're out the other end. You change the leader. Honestly, the Tories get away with 100,000 deaths. That's what will happen. That's what will happen. And so I would sort of, the basis of that sort of position, I think, is very weak. Yes, Labour need quote unquote white working class voters in swing seats. They need to do that while holding on to young voters, BAME voters, etc. And I saw Jeremy Gilbert say, well, they've stacked them up in these sort of metropolitan seats. Young people are voting for Labour in these other seats as well. Okay, if you look at somebody like Ian Lavery, majority of 700. If you get rid of a lot of Muslim votes in his seat, young votes, the seat's gone, right? You have to start winning lots of new votes from other places. And I don't think thinking's gone into it. If you look at, what's Labour's heartlands today? London, the West Midlands, right? And what's one of the first things that Keir Starmer does is say that, Kashmir doesn't have the right to self-determination, effectively, was this sort of statement after he met with Labour Friends of India. That doesn't indicate to me he actually has a political strategy around this stuff. It was just some kind of vague virtue signally. I will do all the things that Jeremy Corbyn didn't do. We need to win back the trust of the Indian community. I mean, first of all, that doesn't exist. This whole idea, by the way, of the Indian community, the Iranian community, they have these big chiefs, the Jewish community, with the various institutional organizations. Of course, they represent significant parts of public opinion within those groups, but they aren't. They're not the whole thing. And this comes out of, by the way, colonialism. That whole idea of multiculturalism as, well, we'll negotiate these different parts of sort of social antagonism with these different groups through the big chiefs representing them. Right, this whole concept of representation and multiculturalism, and I'm a huge fan of multiculturalism, just not this kind of multiculturalism, comes from how Britain used to administer colonial relations with various tribes within one state. Of course, the state had arbitrary borders. They had nothing. They in no way were congruent with the actual people living there, whether it was ethnic or linguistic homogeneity, and so they often had to play off various groups against one another. And that's where this idea of all representation comes from. It's outrageous. And actually, if you want to live in a free society, what's really important is the rights of minorities within minorities. They also matter. And it seems to me that this whole idea of multiculturalism and representation within the kind of coming out of the Labour right, basically they think, fuck these people. You know, if British Iranian opinion said we favour regime change in Iran, if they said that, right, let's just say they magically said that, and I would say, well, no, that's, as somebody who's British Iranian, I've got family over there, I think that's outrageous, it's wrong. By their logic, they'd say, oh, self-hating British Iranian, don't listen to him. No, because each person's opinion and views are equally valid. That's the whole point of democracy.
We're getting lots of super chats tonight, so thank you for all of those. Faye SF with a €10 super chat asks, does Aaron know of any similar examples to RLB being sacked in Labour Party history or any other party? General knowledge question for you there.
Maybe under a Miliband.
I mean, Emily Thornberry is quite a good example. Yeah. I mean, in the sense that I don't think she was a factional opponent really to Ed Miliband, but basically he decided, I'm going to look decisive by getting ahead of a potential awkward story by just sacking someone for, a tweet that could be misinterpreted. This is sort of say, I'm going to get ahead of the news story by making sure there'll be no negative headlines by just sacking the person. Yeah. And the problem there is, where does it end? That was Ed Miliband's style of leadership. It was to say, I'm going to preempt any attack by, giving in already. And then what did we end up with? We ended up with a big tombstone that said controls on immigration. So if what you do is try and avoid any negative story, any difficult story by just capitulating, you'll end up 4 years down the line with nothing that anyone is inspired by, nothing that anyone really wants to go out and vote for, and especially in these places that Keir Starmer is taking for granted. And I think that is really, I suppose, one response to this. It's to show Keir Starmer that there are certain sections of society who he seems to think he can ignore, who he can't. And that's by making sure that, if you are going to, well, one, you stay in the Labour Party because we need to win those NEC seats in the next round of NEC elections. That needs to be 9 left-wingers getting onto the NEC. But two, you have to show that your criticisms of what Keir Starmer is doing are grounded in popular movements out in society, because it's no point. He's going to say, whenever people criticize him, oh, that's just 10,000 people on Twitter. And what you have to prove is, no, actually, that's more like 1 million people or 2 million people out in society who feel this way. So it is about having that sort of connection to more popular movements, I suppose. Can
I say, I said earlier on that I think that the Tories will have a brown or black leader before Labour will. And one of the reasons being, like I say, they think there's this mythical idea of the British centre and public sentiment. Premier League football clubs have been more radical on Black Lives Matter than the Labour Party. Think about that. Every single Premier League football club, before the games, they take the knee, they have on the back of their chest Black Lives Matter. They're doing all positive sort of signalling. Burnley, they had the White Lives Matter plane coming over. I thought that was reprehensible. I thought it reflected incredibly badly, not just on Burnley Football Club, but I think everybody who loves English football should be ashamed of that, because it hasn't really happened in any other major sporting league. It was embarrassing, but their response was great. And they put the statement out on Facebook and Twitter, and they had some of their own fans sort of coming back at them. And hopefully some of those people will learn and become better for it. That is a debate that Labour's not even having right now, right? When multi-million pound sporting commercial businesses, Premier League football clubs, are better on Black Lives Matter than the Labour Party, something has gone seriously badly wrong. Now, Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner did, they took the knee, they did a Twitter photo. That's great. And I thought that was great. And I think it's better to do that than not do it. But substantively, what else have they done? The only thing they've done on race is how it relates to coronavirus. So there's clearly a fear, they're clearly concerned, inhibited, that they'll be painted as a political party or an in hoc to Black Lives Matter. They fear that, but Manchester United, Tottenham Hotspur, Chelsea, Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool aren't. I mean, again, they are putting themselves in trouble if they're embarrassed about their own core vote. You're not going to win a general election, right? If you're ashamed to even talk about the things that matter to the people that care most about your guy, Keir Starmer, entering 10 Downing Street, you haven't got a hope in hell.
We've got almost 3,500 people watching, but only 884 likes. Let's get way over 1,000 likes while we're live tonight. It helps with the algorithm. Finally, we're going to talk because we're going to do a slightly shorter show than usual because it's an emergency one, only on one topic. What should the left-wing MPs do next? So there are, Rebecca Long-Bailey basically was the most senior left-winger in the cabinet, but there are other members of the Socialist Campaign Group who are on the front bench. Let's get up some of these. So I think Marsha de Cordova, Dan Carden, Margaret Greenwood, Imran Hussain. So this is from Alvy Ray from the New Statesman. She sort of listed who's both on the front bench and in the campaign group. Andy MacDonald, Lloyd Russell Moyle, Kat Smith, Rachel Maskell. So I suppose they've got a choice as what are they going to do? Are they going to say, we're so upset by the way that you've treated Rebecca Long-Bailey that we're going to resign as a statement? Or do they think that actually, again, a bit like left-wing members, Keir Starmer would love left-wing members to just all leave the Labour Party because then he doesn't have to worry about them anymore. But does he have the same approach to left-wingers in the shadow cabinet? It's difficult to say. I mean, when Corbyn was worried about shadow cabinet members resigning back in the day, when he still had centrists in the party before they all did, the worry was that when they resigned, that could lead to a split of the party because ultimately the centrists had a majority on the PLP benches. The sad fact is that after 4 or 5 years of Corbynism, the left-wingers on the Labour benches are still a minority, which basically means they have very little leverage over Keir Starmer, given that the Tories have an 80-seat majority. So Starmer's going to struggle to defeat them in the Parliament anyway. So, if you're already in quite a significant parliamentary majority, what are these extra 30 left-wingers? What leverage do they have? I don't know, but that's a difficult question I'm going to put to you, Aaron.
Well, yeah, people have been talking about the legacies of Corbynism. You know what? If the left doesn't get its act together, and by the way, people should not be leaving the Labour Party, stay in the Labour Party, vote in the NEC elections around a United Left slate later this year, I think in a month or two, right? If that doesn't happen, then the only legacy of Corbynism will be that the Labour Party was smaller and more right-wing than when he became the party leader in 2015. That's the only legacy. Forget John McDonnell trying to persuade himself that it has something beyond that, because actually the legacy of what's happened over the last 5 years is up for grabs right now. It could go one of either way. And right now it looks to me like Labour is a smaller party and more right-wing than what it was under Ed Miliband. I mean, being fired for sharing an article in Independent where somebody's saying something, perfectly reasonable about policing practices. I mean, ridiculous, crazy. You won't call on a Tory minister like Robert Jenrick to be fired or for Dominic Cummings to be fired. I think Ed Miliband would have done that. And so people need to not be disenchanted. And it's a great line about, if you were never enchanted in the first place, if you had no illusions, you can't be disillusioned. And I think that's how we should look at things now. What I will say is, what a tragedy. After 5 years, and I thought Jeremy Corbyn was a great man. I thought he did some great things. But I thought the New Year's honours list, when he put up Kerry Murphy, Tom Watson, and the former Speaker of the House, John Bercow, I thought, that really sums it up. You could have put in 3 or 4 socialists, brown and black women, real community leaders, and you didn't, and that's really tragic. And that tells you this was a historic opportunity to reformulate British politics. Open selection. We would have had the kinds of people now that are coming in through primaries in the US. We would have had something similar, a mechanism that was very similar to revivifying not just the Labour Party but British politics. Didn't take it. Really, really, really tragic. But the point is, that can't be allowed to happen next time. The next time, because this is like waves coming in and out, and it's going to come back in soon because coronavirus is going to be a maelstrom of hell, an economic Armageddon. When it comes back in, the left is going to be much more organised, have much better ideas, have great personnel, not just to run the Labour Party, but to administer the British state, to build socialism. And that's why, if you're serious, you stay in the Labour Party, because you're going to leave, you're going to tweet about it, and then you're going to go on your Xbox. That's not a political strategy.
Aaron, thank you for joining me on this emergency episode this evening. We're going to be back tomorrow night because I'm sure there are going to be more developments in this story. We'll know by tomorrow evening what the left-wing frontbenchers are going to do to try and stop Keir Starmer purging everyone. We'll have to wait and see. But we'll be back tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Thanks for all your super chats tonight. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.